How did Norma Jean, a little girl used and abused by the foster system in the midst of the Great Depression, grow up to become arguably the most glamorous and well-known Hollywood icon of all time? And did her winsome embodiment of the Hollywood sex symbol come at a fatal cost? I'm Jordan Sparks, and this is The Chilling Story of Marilyn Monroe. The woman the world recognizes as Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926, and baptized Norma Jean Baker. Baker and Mortensen were the surnames of her mother Gladys Baker's two ex-husbands. Monroe created part of her stage name using Baker's surname at birth, Monroe. Monroe never knew who her father was. In her unfinished memoir, My Story, she wrote that her mother had a picture of a man who looked like actor Clark Gable but wouldn't tell her daughter his name. Whenever Marilyn thought of her father, she pictured Gable, whom she later starred opposite in her last movie, The Misfits.
I ought to have about 40 for the truck and me. At least 25 for you.
In 1981, the New York Times reported that a recently deceased man called Martin Edward Mortensen had been in possession of a copy of Norma Jean Mortensen's birth certificate, naming him as her father, along with marriage and divorce papers between himself and Baker. This was especially interesting given that in 1962, the newspaper had reported that he died in 1929. Norma Jean, unfortunately, spent most of her life in and out of foster care, and at the time, being a foster parent was seen more as a money-making scheme than an act of compassion. The New York Times reported that Monroe lived with 12 different families, many of whom were neglectful or abusive. Monroe later said she was sexually assaulted by a lodger in one of the homes and developed a stutter as a result of the trauma. When Marilyn was only 15 years old, her foster parents decided they could no longer take care of her and instead decided to arrange a marriage between her and their neighbor, 21-year-old James Doherty, when she turned 16. Doherty later told the LA Times, "I thought she was awful young, but I took her to a dance. We talked and we got on pretty good. They married on June 19th, 1942. Doherty and Marilyn Monroe later characterized their relationship differently. Doherty claimed they were in love, but Monroe wrote, "My relationship with him was basically insecure from the first night I spent alone with him." Doherty remarried twice and died in 2005. Marilyn Monroe's first show business job was modeling, which served as a stepping stone into the movies. She was signed into her first movie contract with Fox in 1946, was dropped in 1947, and signed with Columbia in 1948, but was dropped again later that year. With her acting career unstable, Monroe struggled to pay her bills. In 1949, and still unknown, she agreed to pose naked for photographer Tom Kelly in exchange for $50, which she needed for a car payment. After Monroe's movie career took off the following year, the photos and the merchandise they were printed on became famous. In 1952, retired baseball superstar Joe DiMaggio asked a friend to set him up with Marilyn Monroe. Being the most famous athlete in the country, DiMaggio got his dinner. Monroe had low expectations, but she was pleasantly surprised to find DiMaggio was reserved and respectful. After a long-distance romance, on January 14, 1954, Marilyn Monroe and DiMaggio married at San Francisco City Hall. Monroe later said they were drawn together by a need for stability, but in her mind, that didn't mean she was going to stop working, just as she'd become a star. Later that September, after DiMaggio watched Monroe shoot the famous subway grate scene for the 7-Year Itch, the couple had a giant fight that turned violent, according to The Guardian. Monroe filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty, and DiMaggio begged for forgiveness, but she refused. At this point, Marilyn Monroe had been typecasted as the dumb blonde over and over and over, and Marilyn actually resented being typecast as the dumb blonde or seductress and wanted to prove that she could bring more to a movie than sex appeal. She took many acting classes, first at the Actors Lab in LA, and later with famous acting coach Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York, where classmates praised her performances. In 1954, Monroe protested against the demeaning roles Fox kept sending her and its refusal to increase her salary even though she was the studio's biggest star at that point. After walking out on her contract, Monroe became the second woman ever to found her own production studio DiMaggio, named after herself. The rebellion worked. Fox raised her salary and gave her creative control. Despite all of her successes in Hollywood, Marilyn suffered from terrible stage fright. Marilyn would get so nervous before every scene that she'd break out in a rash. She struggled to learn lines and forgot technical requirements like hitting her mark, walking out of the light, or out of the focus. These problems meant that editors often had to patchwork together many takes to form a usable scene. At 3:30 a.m. on August 5th, 1962, Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist Dr. Ralph Greenson broke into her bedroom by smashing a window to find the actress dead in her bed, with an empty bottle of sleeping pills on her nightstand. Monroe's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, had awakened in the middle of the night to find a light on in Marilyn's room and the door locked. Murray called Dr. Greenson, worried that something was amiss. Or at least that's what was reported at the time. In a new Netflix documentary, The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, The Unheard Tapes, Monroe's biographer, Anthony Summers, presents a new timeline of the events of the night Monroe died. According to the documentary, around 10:30 p.m. on August 4th, an attendant alerted Jacobs that something was terribly wrong while they were at the Hollywood Bowl, evidently much earlier than the highly publicized 3:30 a.m. discovery of Monroe's dead body. That's not true because my husband was there. My husband fudged everything off, Jacob's wife says in the tape played in Netflix's doc. Instead, Summers corroborates with several members of the ambulance team that Marilyn had in reality been taken to the hospital by ambulance late that evening, still alive, and died en route to the hospital. In the documentary, Murray states on tape that Robert Kennedy was at Monroe's home in the afternoon on the day she died. In the days leading up to her death, according to Summers' reporting, Monroe told a friend that she was very much in love and was going to marry Bobby Kennedy. Murray also states that Kennedy and Monroe had a terrible fight the day of her death. The documentary confirms that Kennedy flew to the airport in a helicopter to catch a flight around 2 or 3 a.m. on the night of Monroe's death. Marilyn Monroe's untimely death at the age of 36 has always been shrouded in mystery. Though Summer debunks inconsistencies in the timeline of the events of Monroe's death, the ultimate mysteries presented in The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, the role that the Kennedys played in Marilyn's life, government fears of her ties to communism, who was there on the day of her death, and what they know still remain mysteries by the film's conclusion. Some like her because she was sexy and beautiful, others because she was a funny comedian. There are people who adore her sensitivity and others who love the way she never stopped trying to make her life more fulfilling. Monroe became the second woman in U.S. history to own her own production company. She broke the mold and challenged the authoritarian structure of the Hollywood studios, which dictated what films their stars would make. She was an outspoken advocate for equality and talent. Nearly 60 years after her death, Marilyn Monroe still has one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, if not the entire world. The actress and model has been immortalized in artworks, song lyrics, iconic images, and more t-shirts than even the most dedicated collector could count. But the same sexy image that made her popular saw her being dismissed by the serious actors she wanted to impress. She struggled to find lasting love and experienced many other tragedies. She often self-medicated, and she struggled to find supportive people to guide her away from her demons. And this is the chilling story of Marilyn Monroe.